Alright, let's make this quick. It's a big topic and I don't want to hold that long. I'm lazy. But let's get to it. Living things need energy to survive. Yeah. This energy is called adenosine triphosphate, or, if you don't want to be a nerd about it, ATP. This is a form of chemical energy that's made within a cell of a living thing. Now, plants and animals make ATP in different ways. And for the certain equation that they use to make this ATP is completely flipped around. Now, the equation for animal cells to make ATP is 6O2 plus C6H12O6, which produces 6CO2 plus 6H2O plus energy. Sorry, I don't have this fully memorized, that long equation. But for plants, it's completely reversed. Reversed. Yeah. Now, the first part we're going to be talking about animals' cell ATP creation. And within these cells, there's mitochondria, which is a small organelle. It's basically a powerhouse. There are 3 steps to this process, and one of them doesn't take place in the mitochondria, but in the cytoplasm of a cell, which is the watery area inside of a cell membrane, and around every organelle within the cell. Now, the part that takes part in the cytoplasm is called glycolysis. Glycolysis is where glucose, 6 little glucose particles, are broken in half and take on 1 ATP each right before they break. Then once they break, they take on another ATP. Moving down the line, they take on NAD+, which turns into NADH plus H plus. It's complicated. Now, after that happens, there's pretty much 3 particles on each side go down and are now pyruvates, which is pretty much how it works. That's glycolysis. And glycolysis makes 2 ATP. That's not a large number, actually. And plus the fact that it takes 2 ATP to perform glycolysis, it's pretty inefficient. So, but it's not my place to talk about it, I can't help it. But next part of the cycle, the Krebs cycle, I guess. The Krebs cycle pretty much takes the pyruvic acid that is part of what's made in glycolysis and sends it through a cycle, breaking it down, and it makes, with every one that breaks off in the cycle, it makes CO2 and 1 and 2 NADH. So it goes around the 3 pyruvic acid, the 3 pyruvics go around, one breaking off every once in a while, creating CO2 and 2 NADH each, resulting in 2 ATP in the end of this part again. Now, next is the electron transport chain. This chain isn't too complicated, it's actually pretty simple. It takes, by the way, the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain both take place in the mitochondria. The electron transport chain takes place in the intermembrane space, where actually ATP synthesis makes ATP. Now, in the electron transport chain, all of the previously made NADH and during the previous Krebs cycle, when the last pyruvate breaks off, it makes 1 FADH. Now, back onto the electron transport chain. In this chain, it takes all of the NADH and FADH and moves it into the intermembrane of the mitochondria. And here's the part of this. If you have 1 NADH in the electron transport chain, that NADH will be transformed into 3 ATP, and 1 FADH will be transformed into 2 ATP. And pretty much whatever's left from that, mainly hydrogen, attaches to oxygen molecules and creates water, H2O, liquid, kinda. And yeah, that's how it's made in the mitochondria, pretty much. And the electron transport chain, by the way, this is a lot bigger of a number, makes about 34 ATP while using 2 ATP. Yeah. You win some, you lose some. But in the end of this, you have a total... Oh, no. I did the math wrong. It creates 32 ATP, which is still not that good of a number. But all in all, through this entire process to make ATP, you now have 36 ATP in all, which is a fair amount, being that cells are pretty much doing this constantly. And with all this motion that I'm doing here with my hand and talking and looking around from the camera to everything, that takes ATP, which a person needs. You couldn't eat without it, you couldn't see without it, you'd pretty much die without it. You couldn't even breathe without it. So, yeah. That's pretty much that. Oh. Now here are a couple extra things. Around glycolysis, when oxygen is present for this, it is known as aerobic. But when oxygen is not present, it's known as anaerobic, which creates lactic acid, which is pretty much what happens whenever a person works out a lot, uses a lot of breath. sweats, all that different stuff. High amounts of physical activity, pretty much. Now, after that, there's... Now, here's what the 100% of energy in glucose is broken down into. 38% of that energy in glucose makes ATP, which we use for everything we do. 62% of the energy from that glucose makes up the heat that keeps us warm, so our body heat. And there we go. That's pretty much all I have to say here. That's it. Okay, we're good. Alright. Bye. See ya. I'm done here. Okay. Cool.